Tossed aside and left to die, I found shelter in your arms. Now let me warm your bed, human." The escape pod's impact shattered the pristine silence of the frozen landscape, carving a molten trail through snow and ice before coming to rest at the edge of a glacial ridge. Inside, Niara Vex fought to remain conscious, her magenta skin darkening to deep purple around numerous wounds. The silver insignia of the Australian elite forces, once worn with fierce pride, now mocked her as the symbol of her betrayal. "Commander." "Draith," she whispered, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth, staining her metallic battlesuit. Her platinum hair, now matted with blood, had come loose from its elaborate warrior braids. "I trusted you." The memory flashed sharp as a blade. Standing on the command deck, presenting evidence of corruption within the High Council, then Draith's cold smile as he ordered her arrest. The firefight, her desperate escape. The coordinates entered blindly, as her ship took critical damage. Consciousness slipped from her grasp like water through fingers. The last thing she registered was the planet's twin moons casting an ethereal glow through the shattered viewport, illuminating her body as it succumbed to the cold. Julian Mercer had not expected to find anyone else on Glacier 7, much less a dying alien warrior. He'd chosen this remote outpost precisely because the Interstellar Mapping Guild had deemed it uninhabitable except for essential research personnel. A perfect place to disappear after what happened on Proxima Station. The crash had registered on his seismic equipment. Protocol would demand reporting it immediately, but Julian had long ago stopped following protocol. Instead, he'd loaded his medical kit onto his terrain vehicle and followed the impact trajectory. "Well, this complicates things," he muttered, examining the wreckage. The ship's design was unmistakably Australian, the very species Earth's forces had been battling for control of the Centauri quadrant. He found her half buried in snow that had blown into the shattered pod. Despite his years as a battlefield surgeon, Julian's breath caught at the sight. Her features were delicate yet strong, fringed by platinum hair that seemed to absorb the moonlight. Her magenta skin, marred with glowing blue wounds, was unlike any Australian he'd seen in military briefings. "Still breathing," he confirmed, scanning her with his medical device. But not for long in this cold. Common sense told him to walk away. She was the enemy. Her kind had decimated his medical unit on Proxima. He'd failed to save 19 humans that day, his friends, his colleagues. That failure had driven him to this frozen exile, yet his doctor's oath pulled at him more strongly than ancient hatred. Damn it all, Julian sighed, carefully lifting her from the wreckage. Her body was surprisingly light despite her tall, athletic frame. "Don't make me regret this, warrior." The journey back to his research outpost was treacherous. Winds howled across the glacier, temperatures plummeting as night deepened. Inside his reinforced shelter, Julian worked methodically, cutting away her damaged battlesuit, applying regenerative gel to the worst wounds, setting up an intravenous solution compatible with Australian physiology. Hours passed as he monitored her vital signs, studying the intricate pattern of natural markings that swirled across her shoulders and down her spine, warrior markings, according to the limited xenobiology texts he had. The scars that interrupted those patterns told stories of battles survived, of pain endured. Not so different from his own, he thought, unconsciously touching the burn scars that covered his left side. It was near dawn when her eyes snapped open, brilliant, amber irises with vertical pupils that contracted sharply in the light. In one fluid motion she grabbed his wrist, twisting with surprising strength despite her injuries. "Where am I?" she demanded, voice low and melodic despite the threat it carried. "Who are you?" Julian remained calm, making no move to free himself. "You're in my research outpost on Glacier 7. I found you half dead in your crashed ship. I'm Dr. Julian Mercer." Her eyes narrowed, scanning the room, noting the medical equipment. "You're human. Last I checked. And you saved me? An Australian?" Confusion and suspicion fought for dominance in her expression. "I saved a patient," Julian corrected, gently but firmly removing his wrist from her grasp. "Old habit. Hard to break." Nyara's gaze fell to her body, now dressed in simple thermal clothing rather than her battlesuit. Vulnerability flashed across her features before being replaced by warrior stoicism. "My name is Nyara Vex, combat specialist of the—" She stopped, pain crossing her face that had nothing to do with physical wounds. "Former combat specialist, it seems." "Well, Nyara Vex," Julian said, preparing a nutrient solution suitable for her physiology. "Whatever you're running from will have to wait. That crash damaged your nephrilic system. You won't be fighting or fleeing anytime soon." She stared at him, clearly calculating threats and possibilities. Finally, she settled back, eyes never leaving his. "Why help me, human? Our peoples are at war." Julian's face remained impassive as he administered the solution. "I'm not at war with anyone anymore, not even myself on good days." He gestured toward the howling blizzard outside the reinforced windows. "Besides, no one survives Glacier 7 alone." As if to emphasize his point, the wind shrieked louder, rattling the structure's foundations. Trapped together by circumstance and climate, predator and prey, healer and warrior, the universe had a strange sense of humor. "Rest," Julian said, moving toward the door. "You're safe for now." Nyara watched him leave, her expression unreadable, illuminated by the cold starlight filtering through frost-covered windows. 3 days passed in uneasy coexistence. Julian maintained a professional distance, checking Nyara's wounds, adjusting treatments, and retreating to his research. Nyara, for her part, remained watchful, conserving strength while studying her unlikely savior. On the 4th morning, she found him in what passed for a kitchen preparing a nutrient-rich broth. "Your medical skills are adequate," she said, leaning against the doorframe. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd offered. "For a human." Julian smiled faintly, not looking up from his work. "High praise from someone whose nephrilic system I reconstructed with improvised tools." Her amber eyes narrowed. "You know Australian physiology well for someone living in isolation. I was chief medical officer on the Proxima station before—" He trailed off, stirring the broth with more force than necessary. "Before what?" Julian's shoulders tensed. "Before I treated too many wounds I couldn't heal." He turned, offering her a steaming bowl. "Your system should handle solid proteins today. Try this." Nyara accepted the bowl, her fingers brushing his. She noticed how he flinched at the contact. "You fear me," she stated, more observation than accusation. "I respect what you're capable of," he corrected. "I've seen Australian combat specialists in action." Nyara tasted the broth, surprised by its pleasant flavor. "Yet you brought me into your dwelling." "Like I said, old habits." Julian busied himself cleaning equipment, his back to her. The thermal shirt he wore didn't quite hide the extensive scarring peeking above his collar. "Your scars," Nyara said suddenly. "Plasma fire?" Julian froze. "Yes. How did you—" "The pattern." "Distinctive." She set down her bowl. "We call them star burns in my language. Many of my unit carried them." Something in her tone made Julian turn. For the first time he really looked at her, not as a patient or a potential threat, but as a person. Her magenta skin had regained its luster, the natural markings along, her collarbone and shoulders more pronounced, the warrior braids she'd rewoven into her platinum hair-framed features that were both alien and strikingly beautiful. "Your unit," he said carefully. "What happened to them?" Nyara's expression hardened. "Dead or worse. Commander Draith doesn't tolerate those who discover his secret alliances with human arms dealers." Julian's eyebrows rose. "Arms dealers? You mean he's been—" "Prolonging the war, profiting from both sides." Her hands clenched. "When I brought evidence to the High Command, he had me branded traitor. My own unit. They believed him." Pain flashed across her face. "All except Terrace, he helped me escape, paid with his life." The revelation hung heavy between them. Julian leaned against the counter, processing her words. "That explains why your escape pod's navigation was set for this sector. Not many know about Glacier 7. Nyara studied him with new interest. "And why you hide here, human? What ghosts haunt your dreams?" Julian's laugh was hollow. "Where to begin? 19 dead under my care when Proxima Station was attacked. I couldn't save them. Command said I did everything possible, gave me commendations I didn't deserve. His voice grew bitter. They wanted their hero doctor to inspire others. I wanted... He gestured vaguely at the isolated outpost. Silence, Nyara finished for him. I understand this. That evening, a tentative bridge formed between them. Julian showed Nyara his research on indigenous microorganisms that thrived in the planet's extreme cold. She demonstrated Australian meditation techniques that helped manage pain during healing. When night fell, bringing temperatures that dropped below even the station's heating capabilities, Julian found extra thermal blankets. You should take my bunk, he offered. The healing chamber is too cold at night. Nyara regarded him with an unreadable expression. And where will you sleep? I'll manage in the lab, it's warmer there. You lie poorly for a supposed recluse, she observed. The lab drops to sub-zero after sunset. Julian shrugged. I've endured worse. To his surprise, Nyara shook her head. Among my people, sharing warmth is not intimate, it is survival. She gestured to the narrow bunk. Your dwelling, your territory. But I will not be responsible for a human freezing from misplaced propriety. Later, lying back to back under layers of thermal blankets, Julian found himself more awake than ever. Nyara's body radiated heat, a peculiarity of Australian physiology that had saved countless warriors in cold-weather campaigns. Your heart rate is elevated, she observed quietly. Are you in pain? No, he admitted. It's been a long time since I was this close to anyone. Nyara was silent for so long he thought she might have fallen asleep, then, almost too quietly to hear, for me as well. The following days brought a subtle shift. Nyara began assisting with Julian's research, her warrior's precision translating well to laboratory work. He taught her Earth's classification systems. She explained Australian understanding of cosmic microbiology. One evening, as they catalogued samples, Julian's hand slipped on a frozen vial. It shattered, a shard slicing his palm. Nyara moved with battle-honed reflexes, catching his wrist and examining the wound. Superficial, she assessed, but didn't release him. Instead, she reached for the medical sealer he kept nearby. Julian watched, fascinated, as she methodically cleaned and sealed the cut, her touch gentle despite her strength. You would have made a skilled medic, he observed. Nyara's lips curved. Slightly. And you, a formidable warrior, your precision is impressive. Their eyes met, held. Julian became acutely aware of her fingers still wrapped around his wrist, of the strange, sweet scent that emanated from her skin. Why did you really save me, Julian? She asked, using his first name for the first time. He considered deflecting, but found he couldn't, not with her amber eyes searching his, because when I found you, you looked like I felt, lost, betrayed by everything you believed in. His voice dropped. And because I'm tired of watching life slip away when I could preserve it instead. Nyara's expression softened. Without a word, she lifted his hand and pressed his palm against the center of her chest, where Australian life energy was said to reside. Then you have preserved more than you know, she said quietly. Outside, Glacier Sevens, endless winter raged on. Inside, something frozen in both of them had begun, imperceptibly, to thaw. The weather monitoring system blared its warning at 0400 hours, jolting Julian from sleep. He scrambled to the console, cursing under his breath at the atmospheric readings. What is it? Nyara appeared in the doorway, instantly alert despite the early hour. Class 5 Hyperborean storm, Julian explained, fingers flying across the controls. The outpost's structural integrity will hold, but we're looking at temperatures dropping another 30 degrees, and we'll lose external power. Nyara moved beside him, studying the meteorological projections. How long? 3 days minimum, maybe longer. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. We need to activate emergency protocols. Conservation of heat, water, energy, everything. They worked efficiently together, falling into an unspoken rhythm. Julian secured the research samples while Nyara reinforced window seals. They moved equipment to the central room, creating a smaller space that would be easier to heat. By mid-morning, the storm hit with ferocious intensity. Winds howled at speeds that bent perception, carrying ice particles that struck the reinforced windows like miniature bullets. The temperature plummeted, and the auxiliary heating system strained to compensate. "I've never seen anything like this," Nyara admitted, watching ice crystals form intricate patterns on the innermost windows despite the heating. "Even the frost moons of Lirakis don't produce such conditions." Julian checked the dwindling power reserves. "Glacius 7 is famous for these storms. It's why the planet was never colonized despite its valuable mineral deposits." He frowned at the readings. "We need to shut down all non-essential systems. That includes the lab equipment and most of the lights." As darkness fell, the outpost became a small island of dim light in a howling void of white. They huddled in the central room, wrapped in thermal blankets, a small heating unit between them, their primary source of warmth. "Will your wounds tolerate the cold?" Julian asked, medical concern evident in his voice. Nyara nodded. "Australians evolved on a world of extremes. Our bodies adapt." She studied him with those penetrating amber eyes. "Humans are more vulnerable to temperature fluctuations." Julian smiled wryly. "We're surprisingly resilient for soft-skinned mammals." The storm intensified overnight. Julian woke to find the heating unit sputtering, its power cell nearly depleted. Worse, the temperature inside had dropped to dangerous levels. His breath formed clouds in the air. Nyara was already awake, examining the unit with a warrior's focused intensity. "It's failing," she stated. "The cold has damaged the internal circuitry." Julian checked their reserves. "We have one backup unit, but it won't last long in these conditions." He hesitated. "There's another option, but it's unorthodox." Nyara raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Australian core temperature runs about 15 degrees hotter than humans. Your people can generate heat through a specialized metabolic process." He met her gaze directly. "In field medicine, we called it survival pairing. An Australian could keep a human alive through extreme cold by direct physical contact." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You're suggesting we share body heat, more directly than before?" Julian nodded, professional despite his discomfort. "It would conserve our resources and ensure both our survival." Nyara studied him for a long moment. "This embarrasses you?" "No," he replied too quickly, then sighed. "Maybe it's just what?" Julian struggled to articulate the strange tension that had been building between them. "It feels like taking advantage of your vulnerability." To his surprise, Nyara laughed, a rich, melodic sound he hadn't heard before. "Julian Mercer, I could break your spine with one hand if I chose. I am many things, but vulnerable is not among them." Her directness startled a laugh from him. "Fair point." As the storm's fury increased, they created a nest of thermal blankets in the center of the room. Julian tried to maintain clinical detachment as Nyara positioned herself behind him, her arms wrapping around his torso, her body curving against his back. The effect was immediate. Heat radiated from her, seeping into his chilled muscles and bones. He felt himself relaxing involuntarily as survival instincts responded to the warmth. "Your heart rate increases whenever I touch you," Nyara observed, her breath warm against his ear. "Is this fear?" Julian closed his eyes. "No, not fear." "Then what?" He hesitated. "Awareness." Nyara was silent for a moment. Then, her voice softer. "Explain." Julian turned slightly, finding her face inches from his. In the dim emergency lighting, her magenta skin took on deeper hues, her eyes luminous. "I'm aware of you," he said simply, "as more than a patient, more than an alien species, more than—" He trailed off. "More than an enemy," she finished. He nodded. "I haven't felt this connected to anyone since before Proxima. I thought that part of me died there." Nyara's expression changed, vulnerability showing through her warrior's composure. One hand moved to his face, fingers tracing the contours of his jaw with curious gentleness. "Among my people," she said quietly, "warriors are taught that connection. Haya's weakness, that attachment dulls the blade." Her eyes searched his. "I believed this until my own commander ordered my execution, and those I'd fought beside for years obeyed without question." Her fingers found the scarring that extended up Julian's neck. Now I wonder what purpose strength serves without something worthy to protect. The heating unit gave a final sputter and died, plunging them into darkness broken only by the faint emergency lights. The temperature began dropping immediately. "Julian," Niara whispered, her body tensing. Something's wrong. He felt it too. A change in air pressure, a different quality to the cold. "The storm's damaged the outpost structure. We're losing atmospheric integrity." They moved quickly, grabbing essential supplies. Julian checked the station schematics. "The emergency bunker," he said, pointing to a reinforced section beneath the main floor. "It's designed to withstand structural failure. They barely made it." As they sealed the bunker door, a terrible groaning sound filled the air, followed by the explosive decompression of the main living area. The bunker shook violently, emergency systems engaging to maintain pressure and oxygen levels. In the chaos, Julian was thrown against a wall, pain exploding through his shoulder. Niara caught him before he could fall, her strength the only thing keeping him upright. When the shaking stopped, they found themselves in absolute darkness. The emergency systems had diverted all power to life support. No heat, no light. "Julian?" Niara's voice came from inches away. "You're injured." "Dislocated shoulder," he managed through gritted teeth. "I need you to reset it." She didn't hesitate. With practiced efficiency, she positioned her hands. On 3. 1, she moved on 2, a warrior's trick. The joint snapped back with excruciating pain that gradually subsided to a dull throb. "Thank you," he gasped. "That was efficient." "I would have tensed on 3, she said matter-of-factly. In the pitch darkness, other senses heightened. Julian was acutely aware of Niara's proximity, her breathing, the heat radiating from her body. "We have enough oxygen for 3 days," he said, trying to focus on practicalities. After that, Niara said with calm acceptance, "we join the stars. But until then, we survive." Her hand found his in the darkness. "Will you accept my heat now, Julian Mercer, without concern for propriety?" In answer, he drew her closer, feeling her arms encircle him as they sank to the floor together. Survival demanded their closeness, but as Niara's forehead pressed against his, Julian acknowledged the truth. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was desire, for connection, for understanding, for the strange, beautiful warrior who had awakened something he thought long dead within him. "I accept," he whispered, as the storm raged unseen above them and the cold pressed in from all sides. Time lost meaning in the darkness of the bunker. Hours or days might have passed. Julian couldn't be certain. The cold had become a living entity, pressing against their small pocket of warmth with relentless determination. They slept in shifts, one always maintaining the vigilant battle against hypothermia, while the other rested. During one such watch, Julian's fingers traced idle patterns on Niara's arm as she dozed against his chest. Her platinum hair spilled across his shoulder, catching what little light emanated from the emergency indicator on their oxygen supply. "You're thinking too loudly," she murmured without opening her eyes. Julian smiled in the darkness. "Sorry." "Occupational hazard of scientists." Niara shifted, her face tilting up toward his, though he could barely see her in the dim light. "Share these thoughts." He hesitated, then, "I was thinking about improbability, the mathematical chances of us finding each other in this vast universe. A human medic and an Australian warrior, sworn enemies by our species' standards, becoming what?" she prompted when he trailed off. Julian considered the question. "I don't know if there's a word for it, in either of our languages." Niara was silent for a long moment. Then her hand found his face in the darkness, fingers tracing his features as if memorizing them by touch. "In the ancient Australian dialect," she said softly, "there is a term, Kilara. It describes 2 celestial bodies that orbit each other so closely they share atmospheres, yet never collide. Neither can exist without affecting the others. Path." Her palm came to rest against his cheek. "Is this what we are becoming, Julian Mercer?" Instead of answering, Julian turned his face into her touch, his lips brushing her palm. He felt her sharp intake of breath, the subtle tensing of her body. "What does this gesture mean to humans?" she asked, her voice taking on a different quality, lower, softer. "It means I'm tired of orbiting," Julian whispered. "I want to collide." The oxygen indicator blinked its steady rhythm, the only witness as Julian found Niara's lips in the darkness. The kiss was tentative at first, an exploration of unfamiliar territory. Then something ignited between them, as if all the heat Niara had been generating found a new purpose. Her fingers tangled in his hair as she pressed closer, a sound somewhere. Between a purr and a growl emanating from her throat, Julian's hands traced the markings along her shoulders, following their patterns down her spine. "Julian," she breathed against his mouth, "there are differences between our species." He smiled. "I'm a xenobiologist. I've studied, not those." "Kinds of differences," she interrupted, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "Cultural ones. For Australians, physical joining is sacred. It forms a bond that cannot be broken." Julian drew back slightly, suddenly serious, and for humans it can mean everything or nothing depending on intent. His fingers traced her cheek. "What would it mean for you, Niara Vex?" She was quiet for so long that Julian thought perhaps he'd misunderstood everything. "Then, it would mean that I choose you over all the stars in all the galaxies," she said, with a warrior's direct simplicity. "That I would fight alongside you, protect your life with mine, share your joys and sorrows until my final breath." Julian's heart thundered in his chest. "That sounds remarkably like what humans call love. Is that what you feel?" The vulnerability in her question struck him more powerfully than any display of her physical strength. "Yes," he answered without hesitation, against all logic and probability. "Yes." What followed transcended species and worlds. Their bodies found harmony despite differences, each discovery a revelation. Julian marveled at the luminescence that bloomed beneath Niara's skin where he touched her, the way her markings glowed with increasing brightness. She explored the terrain of his scars with reverent fingers, as if reading a sacred text written on his flesh. "You are beautiful," she whispered, tracing the burn patterns across his chest. Julian, who had hidden his scars for years, felt tears prick his eyes. "So are you," he managed, following the intricate patterns of her warrior markings. Every mark, every scar. They moved together in the darkness, creating their own light. When they finally lay spent in each other's arms, the oxygen indicator showed dangerous levels. Neither mentioned it. Some truths needed no voice. "The storm will break soon," Niara said against his shoulder. "I can feel the pressure changing." Julian nodded, his fingers still tracing idle patterns on her skin. And then we face what comes next, together." As if in answer to her words, a distant mechanical hum penetrated their sanctuary. The emergency systems surged to life, dim lights illuminating their intertwined forms. "The auxiliary power," Julian said, sitting up. "It's rebooting." The storm must have passed. Niara was already moving, warrior instincts alert. "Something else is happening, listen." Beyond the mechanical sounds of the recovering systems came another noise, the unmistakable hum of engines. Not the outpost's generators, but something larger, something in orbit. Julian checked the external sensors, now flickering back to life. His blood froze. "It's an Australian scout ship," he said, showing Niara the readings. "Military class." Her face hardened into the warrior he'd first encountered. "Draith, he's found me." "How?" "The emergency beacon in my escape pod. It must have activated during the storm." Her eyes met his, fierce determination replacing the tenderness of moments before. "I must face him." Julian gripped her shoulders. "That's suicide. He has a fully armed ship, troops." "And I have something worth fighting for," she cut him off, her hand cupping his face. "For the first time in my life." The world outside the bunker was transformed. What had once been Julian's orderly research outpost was now a landscape of twisted metal and shattered equipment. The main structure had collapsed entirely, leaving only the reinforced sections intact. Snow had invaded every exposed surface, creating strange sculptures of ice-encrusted technology. "My communications array is gone," Julian observed, surveying the damage. "We can't call for help. Niara moved with predatory grace through the wreckage, retrieving what equipment remained functional. "We won't need to. Draith will find us soon." "Enough!" The sky above had cleared to a crystalline blue, Glacier 7's twin moons visible despite the daylight. Against this backdrop, a metallic glint caught Julian's eye, the scout ship beginning its descent. "We have maybe 20 minutes, he calculated. "What's the plan?" Niara's expression was grim as she extracted her partially repaired battlesuit from the wreckage. "I confront Draith. You remain hidden." "Not a chance," Julian retorted, gathering medical supplies and what passed for weapons among his research. "Tools. We face this together." They argued briefly, fiercely, before the reality of their situation forced a compromise. Julian would remain concealed initially, providing a tactical advantage if negotiations failed. The scout ship landed with precision on a flat expanse of ice half a kilometer from the ruined outpost. Its sleek, predatory design reflected Australian military aesthetics, form following lethal function. The boarding ramp descended, disgorging 6 armored figures led by a 7th, whose ornate uniform marked him as Commander Draith. Even at a distance, Julian could see the family resemblance between Niara and her former commander, the same tall, athletic build, though Draith's skin was a deeper shade of blue rather than Niara's magenta. "Be careful," Julian whispered, squeezing her hand one last time before taking his position among the ruins. Niara stood tall, her platinum hair unbound, her repaired battlesuit gleaming in the cold sunlight. She walked forward to meet her betrayer with a warrior's pride. "Specialist Vex," Draith's voice carried across the ice. "I'm pleased to see you survived. We detected your beacon during a routine patrol. Most fortunate." "Spare me your pretense, Draith," Niara called back. "You came to finish what you started." The commander spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "A misunderstanding, nothing more. Your accusations against the council were taken seriously. Investigation revealed complications. You've been exonerated." Julian, watching from concealment, saw Niara's posture shift slightly, surprise quickly masked. "You expect me to believe the council discovered your treachery?" she challenged. "Politics change, Specialist. The war effort has evolved. Your skills are needed again." Draith took a step forward. "Come home, Niara. Your place is with your people." Julian felt a cold that had nothing to do with Glacier 7's climate. Would she go? Return to the life she'd known, the purpose she'd been bred for? Niara stood motionless for a long moment. Then, "You're lying." Again. Draith's facade cracked, his expression hardening. "Your decision is unfortunate but expected. Sentimentality was always your weakness." He gestured to his soldiers. "Retrieve the traitor. Kill anyone else you find." The troops advanced with military precision. Niara dropped into a fighting stance, drawing the makeshift weapon she and Julian had assembled from outpost components, a crude but effective energy disruptor. What followed was a battle ballet of lethal grace. Niara moved like living mercury, her warrior training evident in every calculated strike. 2 soldiers fell before the others could adjust their tactics, but even a warrior of her caliber couldn't prevail against superior numbers and weaponry. A containment field ensnared her, energy bands constricting her movements. Draith approached, satisfaction evident in his cruel smile. "Your defiance was always impressive, Specialist, but ultimately futile." He activated a wrist control, causing the energy bands to tighten. Niara gasped in pain but remained defiant. "The human you've been sheltering with," Draith continued conversationally. "Where is he?" "Gone," Niara managed through gritted teeth. "Evacuated during the storm." "Lies." Draith tightened the bands further. "No ship has left this planet. He's here. And when we find him, his death will be most educational for you to witness." Julian had seen enough. Activating the device they'd prepared, a modified research drone carrying a thermal disruptor, he sent it skimming across the ice toward the Australian troops. The explosion wasn't large, but in the frigid atmosphere, the sudden heat differential created a shockwave that knocked the soldiers off balance. In the confusion, Julian emerged from hiding, medical injector in hand. Before Draith could react, Julian pressed it against the commander's neck, delivering a precise dose of the compound he'd synthesized from Glacier 7's indigenous bacteria, harmless to humans, but triggering temporary paralysis in Australian physiology. Draith collapsed, his control device deactivating. The energy bands around Nyara disappeared, and she moved instantly, securing the fallen commander while Julian disabled the remaining soldiers with his improvised weapon. "You shouldn't have revealed yourself," Nyara admonished, though her eyes shone with something beyond warrior pride. "Kilara, remember," Julian replied, helping her bind the paralyzed commander. "We orbit together now." With the situation contained, they faced a decision. The scout ship offered escape, a means to leave Glacier 7 behind. But where would they go? Two species at war offered few havens for a mixed couple. "I know people," Julian said as they secured Draith in his own ship's holding cell. "Scientists, diplomats, people who believe this war has gone on too long. With evidence of Draith's corruption, we could change things." Nyara considered this, her warriors mind-calculating possibilities. "Or we could find a neutral world, start again, away from both our peoples." "Whatever we choose," Julian said, taking her hands in his, "we choose together." The decision was made not with words, but with the silent understanding that had grown between them. Julian gathered his most important research, work that could potentially benefit both species. Nyara downloaded the ship's intelligence, evidence of corruption that reached far beyond Draith. As they prepared for departure, the Achi, twin moons of Glacier 7, aligned in rare conjunction, bathing the ice planet in silver-blue light. Standing at the ship's viewport, Julian marveled at the beauty of the world that had nearly killed them and brought them together. "It's strange," he said softly. "I came here to die slowly, hiding from everything. Instead, I found a reason to live." Nyara's arms encircled him from behind, her warmth seeping into him as it had that first night. "And I, sent here to die quickly, found something worth surviving for." The scout ship lifted off, leaving behind the shattered outpost and the frozen wasteland that had forged an impossible bond. Ahead lay uncertainty, two people against the vastness of a war-torn galaxy. But as Julian turned in Nyara's embrace, finding her lips with his, he knew with absolute certainty that whatever storms awaited, they would weather them together. Beyond the frost of Glacier 7, beyond the boundaries of species and allegiance, they had found in each other a truth more powerful than any weapon, any war. That love, against all probability, could bloom even in the harshest environments. And that was worth fighting for.